Hey, good morning, everyone. Josh of Severe Weather. Happy weekend to you. Thank you for joining me. I know I've been a little quieter in the last week with travel and just quieter weather altogether and quieter tropical weather. Now that the severe weather season's beginning to finally wrap up, we're going to head into a more typical pattern. We are going to have to talk more about what's going to go on in the tropics. So this video is going to focus on some of the longer range forecasting, mainly for the Atlantic Basin, but I will talk about the rest of the tropics. And as always, I appreciate you all joining me today. Here is a look at the prediction coming up, and things are quiet right now. I don't think they'll stay that way too much longer, but we are kind of in the calm before we see what should be a very hyperactive season, probably in the second half of August and through the entirety of September, and maybe quite a bit of October as well here, as we're going to see things ramping up very quickly over very warm waters in the tropics. These are the storm names, and we've gotten through Chris, so three storms into the season, a little above the average, but not by a whole lot as things have slowed down. But you'll see we are going to get into the meat of the season here pretty soon. We're going to see things like Debbie, Ernesto, Francine, maybe Gordon here in August, Helene, Isaac, Joyce, Kirk, Leslie, Milton, Nadine, Oscar, Patty, Raphael, Sarah, Tony, Valerie, and William. And that takes us through the list. There are additional names on the list that I think we may see. I'm not sure how deep we get. My forecast originally was for 30 storms this season that I put out here earlier. And to be honest with you guys, I may be adjusting this down just a little bit just because we're in kind of a pretty big period where things are quiet. But nonetheless, we're going to be well above the average. And we are going to see major hurricanes during the heat of the season, especially in the Gulf and in the Caribbean. We've already seen one, and that was quite a storm, and just a very hectic season to come still. The Pacific is where the action is right now. We finally have action there. It's been an extremely quiet first 45 to 60 days of the season. I've never seen one this quiet in the Western Pacific, but now things are heating up. And if you're in China, you're going to see not one, but two systems. This is the first one, Tropical Depression 4. Shouldn't be a very strong system as it heads into southern China here by the middle of the week. But the next system will be Tropical Storm Karina or Gayami, and that is likely to become our first typhoon of the season to threaten land. And you'll see the track takes it close to Taiwan and close to and over the Okinawa prefecture, these islands over here, like Miyako. But right now, some uncertainty still as the storm is still forming, but likely to take a track towards the East China Sea and eventually the China coastline as a pretty intense system here later next week. Show you first the first system here as it is beginning to show some signs of organization in the Western Pacific. And the official track takes it towards Haiku here as a 45 to 50 mile per hour tropical storm sometime Monday night or Tuesday. Here you can see the strike probabilities are fairly high, but we're not talking a very intense system. The pressure could get down to maybe as low as 990 millibars. So probably going to be a moderate tropical storm when it's coming on shore. This is our next system, and it's got larger parameters for development here into a bigger system. And you see that is beginning to happen right now. This is 5, but likely to become our next tropical storm. And you'll see the peak wind forecast is 100 knots. That's about 115 miles per hour. So a severe cyclone here making landfall close to Miyako and then maybe making a bend to the left. This does put Taipei in its path. It also puts Shanghai in the path. And down the road, there could be somewhat of a threat towards Korea as well. But at that point, probably a weakening system. We see a large number of models showing this to be a typhoon, some a very strong typhoon, some not so much. But a pretty good chance that this is going to have a direct strike here on China. Here you can see a high threat for at least tropical storm force wind. A pretty good threat here as well for strong tropical storm force wind and typhoon force wind. This is, again, experimental, but showing it in this area here, which would impact land. So we're going to be tracking that one. But for the rest of the video, let's take a look at the Atlantic. And it's not that things aren't wet and stormy in the Atlantic. We're definitely seeing that. It's just we don't have favorable conditions for environmental unfavorable environmental conditions for tropical development. We've got a lot of stuff out there to track. A very active monsoon trough here. Let me pull my pen out and I'll start circling some items for you guys to be able to track at home. And oops, get that out of the way. Hit the wrong screen, but you can see We are lined up here with lots of rain coming off the African coastline, wave after wave after wave. But the problem here is that the air is very stable, and we've got a lot of Saharan dust, which is common this time of the year, but that is capping things and keeping anything from developing. I saw the movie Twisters with my coworkers yesterday here in Dallas. That's where I work, even though I live in North Carolina. And amazing to see EF5 after EF5 after EF5. That just doesn't happen in real life, but the story's pretty cool. So I encourage you to go see the movie. I definitely enjoyed it, but meteorologically, just that will never happen. In the tropics, you can see a very good setup here for waves to come off the coast, but very unfavorable to see things forming very quickly. However, I think that is going to change here. Right now, we're just set up where we've got strong flow aloft and a boundary that's just going to hang out here over the southeast and produce some wet weather, but at least keep our temperatures down from where they were a couple weeks ago and even this past week. In the Pacific, we are going to see kind of some more areas to watch here coming through the Eastern Pacific here, but most likely no threat to land from any of these systems that cross the basin here. So that's some good news for the time being. Taking a closer look here at the Gulf of Mexico, you can see we do have a trough in place here. Sorry for that slow load here. You see kind of an upper level low here in place over the central Gulf of Mexico, but certainly not a favorable spot to see this development. Here's the upper low right in here. You can see pretty fast flow out of the west here, creating some strong wind shear. So wet along the coast in the places that just got hit by Hurricane Beryl. But fortunately, just nothing that looks like it's going to develop. We do get concerned this time of the year about remnant fronts that hang out here over very warm water, but I just don't see a path for something to form quickly at this point. And I think it stays that way over the next couple of weeks. So enjoy it while you can because things are going to change. Here is the Saharan dust layer, and you can see it's very active. This is very common for the middle of July. We don't typically see a lot of tropical development coming off of Africa. These past few seasons have been crazy in that we actually have seen some in June and early July. Beryl, a great example. Last year, a couple of storms, but we get that small window before the dust kicks things up. And until the dust settles, we just don't see anything forming. And right now, you could see things are going to stay pretty unfavorable, at least for the next week. There may be somewhat of a break towards the end of July where the dust just kind of thins out, but it's still going to take some time to get things to become more favorable for any kind of development. As we take a look into the longer range, there are a lot of things, though, that I am watching that are going to show us some concern for more activity. This is a look at the upper level chart, and you're going to see a lot of the Atlantic Basin has above average higher pressure, with the exception of the main development region. This stronger high pressure area here, you could kind of see it in place aloft near Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, creates a very strong Bermuda high. When you've got this high so strong, that typically is going to force storms to go on a more westerly path rather than recurving near and east of Bermuda, which we saw last year in an El Nino. We're not in an El Nino anymore, so things have changed. But obviously, that is something of concern as we get into the meat of the season. It still looks like even the month of October is going to be favorable for things to come through the Caribbean into the Gulf of Mexico. Farther up the East Coast, probably not so much, but that is something we have to watch. We have to time each trough, and if the trough picks a system up and pulls it northward, October would be the month for that to happen. As we get to November and December, things obviously are going to be quieting down somewhat, but the waters are warm, so a late season storm certainly can't be ruled out. Here's what the Atlantic Basin sea surface temperatures look like, and they remain very warm despite the fact that we had Hurricane Beryl. Take a look at these anomalies that are a couple degrees Celsius above average over the windward and lesser, the windward and leeward islands of the Lesser Antilles. Just a lot of warmth here in the area that Beryl formed. And even over the Western Caribbean and the Gulf, especially closer to land. Sorry, the pink clashes with the red here, but closer to land, the water temperatures are hottest with respect to average, which means storms that are going to come in like Beryl are going to have a chance to strengthen as they come in. And the only thing that's going to slow them down is land itself. And if you're in Houston, you realize that even though a Category 1 hit you, it was strengthening as it was hitting. And until it moved over land, it took a while to get it to stop. So the momentum was just too strong for that system to just go quietly into the night. It was a very impactful system. And if you're on the Gulf Coast and the southeastern coast, you take a look at how warm these departures are. We have to obviously give those some merit and give them a lot of attention. You will see we still have some cooler than average waters near and south of Bermuda, and then extremely warm water over the North Atlantic. And the Canary Current here, which has been running cooler than average over the last several weeks, is beginning to bounce back and get closer to average. And that Canary Current, by the way, as it feeds down into the Cape Verdes, as it continues to warm, like we saw last year, will obviously flip the narrative here and allow for more favorable conditions for development. The only other thing I've been watching is this cooler pool of water near the equator, kind of what you would call an Atlantic La Nina, if you want to call it that. It has not really taken over much. It's getting subdued by the warmth up in here, so I don't think it's really going to be a factor this hurricane season, but I'll watch it for you guys just to be safe. Here's a look at ocean heat content. Cyclone heat potential still extremely high, even after Beryl. The Gulf of Mexico is primed. The Caribbean is especially primed. The only thing keeping storms from strengthening in here is wind shear this time of the year, but that usually lessens as we get into August and September. It's usually higher in June and July, just based on where the jet stream is set up and where our troughs are going to be. But you can see over the last 7 days, after Beryl moved out, things have already begun to bounce back. Our anomalies are flipping again and heating up. So the general trend here is that while things are a little cooler than they were a week ago out in here, our storms are going to have a path to carve their way through the Caribbean or near the islands and into the Gulf of Mexico, which continues to outpace the typical warmth you would see at this time of year. And the other thing is the Canary Current coming down through here, and temperatures in the last week alone have recovered to where they're more than 2 degrees Celsius in change above the average. So take the average, then take the rate of change, and it's skyrocketing. So a lot here, obviously, to be concerned with, but again, until something forms, we just have potential. Taking a look at El Nino, La Nina, we've been neutral pretty much since April here. We've had some variation, but right now, the average temperature in the 3.4 region of the South Pacific or the Equatorial Pacific is just under 2.2 degrees Celsius below. So we're kind of still neutral, but we are trending to a La Nina. It's kind of been trending that way actually since April, and we've seen a lot of kind of variability as you would expect. But from the Climate Prediction Center, you can see the models are all showing this heading towards that negative 0.5 degree. That is officially where we would be to be La Nina, and that would probably take place sometime in August or sometime August and September. It doesn't mean we automatically see a huge rebirth of storms just because we go to La Nina. There's a lot of factors in play here. But obviously, a La Nina would be a more favorable setup for more storms in the Atlantic Basin. And I think that's been the general thinking here all along. If you look at the main development region in the Atlantic, while it did cool a little bit after Beryl, it has bounced back, and you can see water temperatures remain above average. The Gulf of Mexico remains at least a half a degree Celsius above the average, and maybe trending upwards again, depending on what we see. So let's take a look at the longer term forecast and when things may form. And in this upcoming week, you can see the Atlantic's going to be pretty quiet, the Eastern Pacific a little bit more lively, and the Western Pacific sees the most action. As we head towards August, the chances are not great yet in the Atlantic, but the trend is heading back in the direction of some more activity finally forming, especially across the main development region. But the Pacific is where things are going to be the next 2 weeks. As we head into the middle of August, you can see chances do begin to climb. And I am going to change this to the Atlantic Ocean basin so you guys can kind of see. So let's go back to this week. And you can see there's just an extremely low chance of anything forming. I don't expect anything to form just yet. As we get to the following week, chances are a little bit higher, but still kind of marginal. And then we start to see a more active pattern expected by the time we get to the second, third, fourth weeks of August, which is typical. But the thing is, once that door opens for storms to form, I don't think it shuts anytime soon. I think we're going to be in a very extreme pattern at that point. This is a look at the African standing wave. And I'm going to circle this to kind of show you guys. So Africa is right over here. This is where waves form, and this is where we are right now. So the velocity potential is not extremely good. It's pretty marginal at this point. As we head, though, towards the 29th and 30th, we are going to see a lot more waves forming here at the end of the month based on what we're seeing here. That's seasonal variation. That's what you would expect. So as waves begin to come off of Africa at the end of this month, they'll take some time to develop, but as we head to about the 5th, the 10th, maybe even the 15th of August, we start to see the parade of storms beginning here based on this forecast from the European model. The other thing I'm watching is the North Atlantic Oscillation. When it is higher, there's a greater difference in pressure between the Azores high and the Icelandic low. The greater that gradient, the higher the NAO. This is something we watch in the winter, but in the summer as well. Follow the green line. That is the mean of models, and you can see it's been negative, which would shut down the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean pretty much, but starting to trend back to positive, and variation is going to be important. This time of the year, a negative NAO favors more of an East Coast, especially northeastern United States, storm track, but a positive NAO favors storms that cut underneath and head towards the southeastern United States and the Caribbean Sea. So we're going to have to watch this pretty closely. The times on these, by the way, this is the beginning of August right in here. So a bit of a jump and then back to neutral. This is the second part, and we're kind of a little on the positive side, but a lot of variation. And then September starts over here. So this is forecast goes out about 6 weeks from now. So I'll be watching that pretty closely for you guys here. The upper level pattern is going to see some lower pressures here over the next few days, which means we're going to have some wind shear. As we head later into July, you'll see the high pressure weakens, but then as we head towards the beginning of August, higher pressures overall take over the Atlantic, meaning Atlantic waves are going to have a good chance of coming underneath this ridge. We call this the ridge over troubled waters. This is the 3rd of August, 2 weeks from today, and you can see these higher than average pressures off the East Coast are going to favor tracks that go from Africa into the Caribbean. I think I've said that 10 times, but just want to make that clear to everybody. So here's another look at wind shear and zonal wind flow, and the reds indicate higher than average convergence, which will basically kill storms from forming. The purpler colors are areas where there's more divergence, where storms are going to have a chance to develop and grow. And as we head towards next week, you can see not very favorable closer to the United States. But as we head into August, we are going to see a flip coming around maybe the 10th or 15th, where much more favorable conditions are going to exist over the Gulf as well as over the Caribbean. And as we get beyond that, this is something that is very concerning to me. I can't pick where exactly a storm will form and where it's going to go. I'm not that good. Nobody is, but overall, that pattern is extremely favorable for active tropical development here by the time we get to about the 20th of August. And you can see the Gulf of Mexico is set up here for something big to come in. Now, I don't know when it's going to be and where it's going to go, but it's set up for something that could be pretty significant by the time we get to the end of August. But that, of course, assumes this forecast is going to be correct. That's a big assumption. Looking at the next few weeks, so you can see from the European here, we are going to see below average activity based on the ACE, accumulated cyclone energy. Probably over the next couple of weeks, things are going to be above average in the Pacific. The mean, the green, when it's above 1, that means it's more active. When it's below 1, less active. As we head into August, the Pacific is neutral. The Atlantic is still a little bit quiet. Then we start to trend upwards where we're getting closer to the average. And then by the middle of August, we should be running at about average, which is typically pretty busy. The peak of the season is still a month after this, September 10th. But in August, things obviously ramp up, and the European is predicting we're going to be back on track for active weather. Longer term forecast from August through January that doesn't include what's happened so far, 3 named storms. The seasonal forecast from the European is for 16 named storms. So it has come down a little bit. And I think, a lot of that can be attributed to some sinking air in the Atlantic basin and a lot of storms that were kind of almost could have happened, but didn't, near the Gulf, near the Caribbean. Beryl was the one outlier. So, my 30 name storm forecast is probably going to be too high, and I can accept that. I'm okay with that. It's still going to be above average, though, and you still see there is some spread here, and we could still see over 20 more storms, maybe even 25 more storms on top of the 3 we've already have. It only takes one to make things just destructive. I mean, we've seen that. Even Andrew in 1992 was later in August. But I think we're going to see several Andrew type storms as we go through the season. Number of hurricanes, typhoons is going to be above average by at least a couple here. And that is from August on. That doesn't include Beryl. and the total amount of cyclonic energy, ACE, is at least 40% above what the average would be. So that still puts us over 200. My prediction's 250. We've already had over 33, which is higher than average, but we're not moving any farther until we get another storm, and that's going to be at least a few more weeks. So in the 200 to 250 range, I still think is a good forecast at this point. So I'm not going to have a lot to talk about the next few days. So enjoy the break while we can. I'm heading back, so I appreciate prayers for travel mercies. But as always, I appreciate you guys tuning in today. If you did enjoy this video, please consider becoming a subscriber. I thank you for your time, and just know that I'm praying for you and your safety. I'm a Christian. I give all the glory to God. I thank him for everything that I do. He has put me on earth to do something like this for you all as a service. This is my gift given from him. And Romans 8:28 says, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. Everybody that's tuning in here, whether or not you believe what I believe, has a purpose. God has created you and you have a purpose. And I pray that you are taking the time that's been gifted to you and using it to your advantage to bless other folks. I love to encourage other people. I think we all need to encourage each other, not to disagree with each other and turn it into a political battle, but indeed to help each other. And this is how I want to give back to you all. So if you have a prayer request, I'm happy to pray for you. I'll catch up with you probably, unless there's a name system, it's probably going to be close to a week here, but trust me, by August, we're going to be doing videos pretty much back to daily again once we get storms to form. So thank you all for your time today. Have a blessed weekend, and I will catch up with you soon. Take care.